most business transactions were being conducted by men. That was just the nature of that society, okay? And in that context, sometimes even if women were present, they weren't paying attention. They weren't part of the deal. So now there's a court ruling and you're bringing a woman who's saying, yeah, I was there, I think that's what they said, or she gets nervous. So Allah said, women, if they, in a sense, understood, if they don't have the background, there should be another one to help them in case they get confused. Some of our non-Muslim colleagues ask about why the Quran says that 2 women's testimony is equal to 1 man's testimony. So I'll say a few things about that. Let's start with our hadith tradition. In our hadith tradition, one of the most learned from a hadith come from Aisha radiallahu anha, who is one woman. And she's testifying that she heard the Prophet say, and especially ﷺ, in situations where there's nobody else around, it's just her and her husband, right? So if the Muslims thought that the testimony of a woman across the board is only half that of a man, then we would have to apply that to the mother of the believers too, and like Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So that would be a problem. In our hadith tradition, there are women that were teaching scholars hadith also, not just sahabiyat. Other women. There's a list of them. Those of you that are interested, there's a book called Al-Muhaddithat. It's been translated into English also by the author himself, Dr. Akram Nadwi. He collects a list of, I think, 2,500 Islamic scholars, women across Islamic history, whose testimony in report collection is something that's part of our tradition, right? So the idea that somehow Muslims thought that women's testimony is half that of a man, it doesn't hold true historically. But that still doesn't answer the question, why is that in the Quran? What's in the Quran is actually a few things. In the Quran, a woman comes to the Prophet ﷺ and complains that my husband does this, this, and this. Okay? She complains about her husband. And the Quran came to her defense. The Quran didn't come to the Prophet ﷺ and say, wait, if a woman comes to you, tell her to bring one more woman before she testifies to anything. You don't see that in the Quran. You actually see a one woman saying something and it's completely acceptable. In fact, acceptable to Allah Himself. Acceptable to Allah Himself. So already within the Quran, you're seeing that this is not a consistent rule. Now let's zoom in on the ayah itself. The ayah is actually talking about witness intimidation. It's talking about 2 things, witness intimidation, and it's talking about prior knowledge. So what happened in Arabian society, you might know the vast majority of people were not literate. The vast majority of people did not know how to write and read and write. That was a minority. And in that ayah, in that same ayah, this is the longest ayah of the Quran, in that ayah, Allah made it a responsibility for the few people who know how to read and write to show up when a loan document is being signed so they can take dictation from both sides. It's kind of like jury duty. Right? So it's because the citizen's responsibility to provide this public service, right? And it's the same, or it's not like being drafted in the military, but being drafted for public service because you're one of the few people that is able to provide this public service. Okay, فَلْيَكْتُبْ مِمَّا عَلَّمَهُ اللَّهُ. From what Allah has taught them, that person should document. Fine. So now we're talking about the minority situation where only some people are capable of documenting these kinds of things. Now, the next component of that is most business transactions were being conducted by men. That was just the nature of that society, okay? And in that context, sometimes even if women were present, they weren't paying attention. They weren't part of the deal. So now there's a court ruling and you're bringing a woman who's saying, yeah, I was there, I think that's what they said, or she gets nervous. So Allah said, women, if they, in a sense, understood, if they don't have the background, there should be another one to help them in case they get confused. Now the other thing is, the ayah never said if they forget. It didn't say أَن تَنْسَى إِحْدَاهُمَا فَتُذَكِّرَ إِحْدَاهُمَا الْأُخْرَى. It said أَن تَضِلَّ إِحْدَاهُمَا. If one gets confused, if one gets lost, the other can remind her. So being confused is not the same as being forgetful. Here's another interesting component, witness intimidation. Tadilla can also be used as a woman's being told, hey, if you testify, then it's not going to be good for you.